And we are live.
Okay. You can see me and everything?
Yes, indeed. I can see your beautiful visage.
Yeah, ditto. So we just recorded a video, our first Dorian Corey project live stream, I guess, if you want to call it. But us talking about this, it got to the point where we needed to essentially talk about the fact that a lot of the experiences that we had are traumatic. And not just with the traumas of dealing with racism, of dealing with being in these white-led organizations where, inequality is endemic to how they operate. It's also kind of some of the interpersonal and community issues and the whisper networks of foolishness that goes on and has been allowed to go on, and having to be in the midst of that is traumatic. And so while talking about our experiences and the things that we do in the community, it's also imperative that we keep ourselves accountable, but then also, as the Dorian Corey Project, ensure that we are holding our community accountable for the violence that they continue, the violence that they perpetuate, and the violence that they allow. So I don't know if Athena, you wanted to, if you had anything to add, or if you wanted to start with some of your experiences that have been not so great, dealing with Buffalo's climate and culture of whisper networks and silence and allowing abuse to proliferate.
Essentially Buffalo is more or less a conservative town, where there's not really a lot of, people. It's mostly like 1 or 2 degrees of separation at most. And so it's compacted in the queer community in Buffalo because it's obviously even smaller than, the community at large. So, we could talk about how we met, over the death of a trans woman who actually, luckily, was still alive, but the community had written her off as dead because she went missing for a while. And, that was interesting to say the least.
So, yes, that was about 2012. That was the first, at the time, that was the first TDOR I had ever went to. And it was the first kind of like trans event that I had ever gone to, as I was starting the process of coming out. And so after this event, which took place at a theater that doesn't exist anymore, that was called Buffalo United Artists. It was kind of like a Buffalo gay oriented theater company. And they had this TDOR event. And I remember the event being particularly weird because there was a lot of harm, in my opinion. From what I can remember, there was not really any trans people who were in charge. It was mostly like white and black cis people in charge. And they kind of had some weird service where we all essentially were to out ourselves and to be at the very front of this small theater, kind of like making ourselves visible, so to speak.
Yeah, so all the trans people had to stand up.
So we had to stand up and go to I believe we had to speak something or read something, or read the names of people that had passed at the time. And so that was, being young, essentially, you're not really knowing the full dynamic. You're just kind of in it and like, oh. And so then afterwards, after that main event, there was like a smaller gathering that was at the park across the street to honor this Black trans woman that was presumed dead. And I
Candlelight
remember,
vigil.
let's say that again.
Didn't mean to cut you off. A candlelight vigil.
Yeah. Yeah, I do remember there were candles there. There were people that had some like liquor and they were pouring out libations and such. And I do recall there were some people with tears in their eyes and such. And I had never met this Black trans person at the time, but that being my first experience of like the community and stuff, it colored my thoughts and thinking that there was an actual community that existed that may have cared about Black trans women. But like Athenais said later on, it was revealed that she was in fact alive, and consequently, since then and until now, I'd never heard anything about this Black trans woman since. And so I don't know if potentially she met violence after the fact and may have needed assistance and didn't get it, or passed away or not. I'm not sure. We've never ever heard anything about this Black trans person ever again. Which
They were a staple before I moved into my neighborhood after escaping my house, with my parents who were abusive. Um, you know, this person is all I would hear about. You know, oh, uh, you remind me of so and so. People would actually mistake me walking down the street. I would just be randomly walking down the street and have people yelling out, this other person's name. Let's um, say Patty, just mistake me for Patty. And it just got to a point where it's like, I'm, not her. Like, but because we're both the only Black trans people I think people knew at the time, they just saw another Black trans woman and automatically was um, calling me this person's name. So and I remember they did actually have issues with you know um, maybe addiction or like housing, instability. It seemed like sex work. It seemed like, and so yeah, it was just kind of jarring because this person is presumed dead, and then they're found to be alive, and then the organization really didn't touch on this person pretty much ever since. Um, and I think that's kind of indicative of how a lot of the organizations operate. It seems like, if it's a traumatic event where they can, garner support, like a death, they're there, but when it's the not so attractive or not so sexy, issues like just finding, you know, uh, emotional support or getting your name changed or updating your documents, those are things that they rarely, if ever, touch on. So
yes, it was rough. I around the time he's still going to the trans groups at the time, and because this was before, of course, I had become affiliated with this specific organization. At the time, I was just like a community member, just someone who was working on the steps towards accessing the um, healthcare / transition services that they offer through this group that Athenais had started. Um, and at the time, not realizing that it was just kind of like a pipeline, what I call the evergreen pipeline. That's a way for you to be able to use a group that some community members had created to then funnel people into your healthcare services that you are getting our tax dollars from to offer these services to us. Meanwhile, it's not really guaranteed that we'll actually have good service. It's not really guaranteed that, our doctors won't be changed or that our hormones will be changed or made inaccessible through financial means and insurance, foolishness, etc. Yes, Um, I'm recalling this because this was the second year, the second TDR that I went to, which was a year after these events of the mistaken trans woman that was eulogized even though she was alive. Um, I recall being, I don't remember if I specifically put myself forward as someone that wanted to do like a keynote or to speak there, but I do recall that I was created like some document because the topic was End the Silence. The topic of the TDR, I believe in 2013, was End the Silence. And we're supposed to, initially this would imply that we're ending the silence around our existence, around the factors that lead to us dying, the factors that lead to us being impoverished, the factors that lead to us having to flee from our families. But of course, like Buffalo and like many other cities in this nation, they say one thing but do another. They put out the image that they care or that they want to help change the narrative and change people's lives for the better. But then, the actual experiences of the people that are impacted by your services or not are often made to be detrimental. In fact, our lives and our health are impacted in negative ways. I'm reminded of a lot of my former coworkers who I had met while going to this transgeneration support group, who at the time were the facilitators. I specifically remember a Black cis man who was one of the persons that was presumably brought into the organization, not just because they had experience as a veteran, but that I guess they supposedly had some cursory experience with the ballroom scene, with voguing. And his experiences seem to have been coalesced to create this Vogue night, Vogue for your life sort of situation in which they used a church that was nearby that they had recently bought and were, converting into a space that's now called the Evergreen Commons. And so I remember they would put on this event for us in the basement that wasn't really quite finished yet, still had like cobwebs and such. There had very much a spooky church mood and feel. But they would put on this event, essentially finding a few people who may be affiliated with like the fledgling ball scene here, slash having connection with this Black cis man who worked there. And then, using this sort of community event as a way to promote services that they offer, like HIV testing and such, which is good. Though usually a lot of the staff that were involved were white, of course, with a few Black LGBTQ people sprinkled in.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember some instances there. This was around the time I had the first event. I remember I was not working there, but I had found out because I had applied previous to this event and finding out there that I was potentially getting hired. And then the subsequent Vote for Your Life events that happened, how, we were pretty much responsible for keeping the show going, it seems. I remember the experience that Tenna had of, being the replacement for the sound going out and having to go get her. I think you had like some
home sound system too.
Yeah, it was like a not a professional type of equipment that would be used in any normal, these nonprofits that have the resources to be able to afford things that won't break down, that the community has to come together to use their own stuff to do to keep the event going. So I remember that was a very interesting experience to like see that and experience that. Um, and then later on, being a person that, because I had started working there, I remember going from like being someone that's assigned to, put some snacks, bags of chips and Huggies or something, on the table, and to watch the table to make sure everyone, gets a fair amount of some of these inexpensive processed foods. And then, remember going from that to all of a sudden, because a lot of these events were made available on Facebook through like the Facebook events. I remember this one situation in which I found myself being like the co-host of this Vogue for Your Life event, and I hadn't been previously consulted about it or told that I was going to be hosting it, or like asking if I felt comfortable um, having my name a part of it to be hosted. And I remember just being kind of taken aback because, at the time, uh, I believe they knew that I had some drag experience, but then I didn't have any experience in like the Vogue ballroom scene. And it just felt very sneaky to me that this organization, would use, one of the only Black trans people that they have to, host this event essentially for good optics, but without actually consulting, the person that they're, saying is hosting and stuff. There are just a lot of other kind of experiences of dealing with these nonprofits and the mostly white coworkers, a lot of them who were not from this area, not born and raised, um, and a lot of the Black, queer, LGBT people, mostly Black gay and Black lesbian people who would be on their payroll, who were not born here as well, and mostly came to this area for school and stayed and, eventually got a job, which was not our experiences collectively or singularly. Um, I know my experience was being a community member, accessing services through the school that I had transferred to at the time. And then those experiences of me in the coming out process, dovetailing with finding out these resources exist and then trying to access them despite living in a hostile environment and having to facilitate my exodus from said hostile environment, which happened to be my home. Um, I just think, especially given the history of this organization and how it's run, and then how it's affected our lives for worse, and their subsequent kind of rebrand by, bringing CC McDonald, bringing T.S. Madison, bringing Cat Black, bringing people that essentially, in a lot of ways, echo and mirror and mimic the Black trans people in their own communities that they don't care about, which I thought was quite interesting. And I don't know if you have anything else to add about.
I was going to ask you if you wanted to add more or less about the work environment and also the access to hormones, because as an employee or someone working for them, to be dropped off their hormone regimen, I think that's something to speak on. And then also, if you want to talk about the just the atmosphere and the dynamic between the coworkers who were there, the transphobic jokes being made by the veteran against another veteran, who's a trans woman, actually, referencing their, quote unquote Adam's apple. And then also the just the threateningness of, some of the other, um, coworkers who were there.
Yes, this organization, like many, they prey upon people who are naive. They especially prey upon people who are young and may not have experience working in these type of like nonprofit white professional environments. Um, and a lot of people that may end up working for them, they have some sort of either connection and or, are people who went to school, got degreed and such. So given, because it's these experiences and memories are traumatic, and unfortunately a lot of them I remember, it's hard to get out of your head when you're experiencing the stuff firsthand, and you're also in the midst of dealing with the trauma of running away from home, not having a job, having to leave the job that you had because they are anti-trans. They made comments about, you know, you would lose your job if you came to work in a dress, things like that. Once I became an employee, and I was thinking that, you know, because I had the experience of being, you know, a group member, part of this transgeneration group that my spouse has started, I don't want to say I came in there with rose-colored glasses, but I kind of assumed, unfortunately, which is the number one rule of never assume, that I wouldn't be dealing with these experiences. So, like, I recall, you know, having to worry about coworkers and other people that worked within this organization in different departments, um, even though it touts itself as like a, you know, inclusive organization that's supposed to, you know, help us, and that may employ some like LGBT people, but, you know, largely there are a lot of like cis het people that worked there. I recall instances of having to deal with racism and having to deal with people not giving, you know, access to the bathroom, having to go through other channels to, you know, ensure that you can be able to go to the bathroom when you need to, and then when needing name change for, you know, like lanyards and such, having to deal with, you know, the racism of, you know, the mostly white people that were working there. Um, it really came to a head when, you know, these coworkers that I eventually had, like I mentioned before, the one black cis man who I had met as a community member and eventually ended up becoming my coworker. Um, Hearing the comments about him commenting on trans women's appearances was especially detrimental isn't the word, but it was disheartening to know that, you know, I'm around these people that are shitty. And then, you know, I'm supposed to be this black trans person that's, you know, supposed to uphold this organization, and or, you know, as a peer educator going to places like bars and such to give them to give people, you know, resources and say, hey, here's packets of condoms and such, and here are, you know, we have HIV and AIDS services and such. To have to deal with these people, seeing them, you know, break rules that were established, drink liquor when they're not supposed to, do other things they were really supposed to do, and then to have these same people um, using language like they would want to punch a coworker in a white trans coworker in the Adam's apple, and say that around those of us who are Black and LGBT, or think that's funny, but then these are the same people making derogatory comments about Black trans people. So it was just a lot having to deal with that, knowing, you know, we didn't really have anyone in your corner. You wouldn't have anyone that would actually believe what you were saying, especially with being so new versus having to have coworkers who were entrenched in the establishment. Um, the dynamics were very, for lack of a better term, interesting, especially as someone who was starting their coming out process. As I stated before, you know, I had been a church child, which means, for those of you who don't know, being fully ensconced in church and that church environment, which can be very conservative, very has its own issues, and so from going to that to then, you know, coming out and all of the traumas and issues that that brings, and then in my mind, thankful that, oh yeah, I get to have a job and I get to be myself and I get to be around other LGBTQ people, and that turns around to be one of the most toxic environments is quite interesting, um, to say the least. And when I left, when I quit that job with the Pride Center Evergreen, it was mostly me being forced to quit because not only the issues of these coworkers and the environment of racism and bigotry that existed, but then as part of the job of uh, being someone who helps facilitate transgeneration and these other groups in which uh, other trans people would meet, having meetings in which, the majority of the trans people there were complaining, but detailing their experiences with the healthcare side of it, um, which mirrored my own experiences with having trouble accessing healthcare at the same organization, while having, at the time we were just in a relationship, like having my own girlfriend deal with this stuff as well. It was quite eye-opening. And, I recall the process when I left, very liberatory, but then realizing that these organizations that claim to be, professional but have all this sort of clout, you know, are not for us in the slight, even to the point of not even thinking it necessary to conduct an exit interview to detail the reasons why, I have to leave, why I feel it necessary to leave. Um, which is quite interesting because I do remember after after leaving and a few months going by and having the opportunity to write about these experiences and detail them in kind of like an online magazine, hearing from other people in the community who I still had contact with, the ways in which this organization was kind of like scrambling to, rebrand and to make themselves, look like they're totally not the organization that they are and were. Um, it's easy to read off on a screen, what the nonprofit industrial complex is and how it operates. But experiencing it in person, having your own livelihood and health and transition negatively impacted is a special kind of hell.
Mhm.
Which is partially why, again, the Dorian and Corey project was born out of, because we live in this city and in this environment where we can see the foolishness happening and we can see uh, how they leverage the sort of white professionalism that the nonprofit industrial complex embodies in how they affect the perception of people who are living here who may not know the dynamics, who may not know, the, how this is operated and who is benefiting from who, and why the Black trans people are the least underpaid, and why the people who are not Black and trans are benefiting from grants and tax money given specifically to help Black trans people. It was just quite interesting. I don't know if you have anything to add. Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Um, I would just say that that part about the hormones not being the hormones being a big sticking point for a lot of the members in the community who were trans. That was definitely something that was an endeavor, because I had actually left my original provider to go and use Evergreen after some coaxing from some of the other coworkers who thought that this would be a great idea because you're, having everything there. And then lo and behold, when I do switch over, um, I receive mail that misgenders me or, uses my dead name. Sometimes the hormones wouldn't arrive. And in a couple instances, I'd go there and like they would fill the prescription right then and there, even though, I'd scheduled it to be picked up hours before, or um, days before. So um, it was just another way to, to show that it was, more or less a pipeline for healthcare dollars and, tax dollars. And, didn't really have the right, uh, interests in actually helping the community. Nonprofits, that whole nonprofit industrial complex, it's like they're there, to affect some change. There might very well be people with decent intentions who work there, but the way it's designed, the system is set up, they don't actually get much change done that's, really felt. So
You're reminding me, yes, to not reveal too much, but might as well. This is what this is for. Essentially, I remember one of the main factors that uh, inspired me to leave that organization was because not only were we experiencing these issues with having trouble with our hormones and then not having any sort of process for them to be held accountable for that, um, but then finding out from other older Black trans youth or older Black trans people, like elders, that they were embarking on a process for advertising their pharmacy services, which I thought was interesting given that there were so many of us who were having issues with the same pharmacy services and the same organizational structure, as well as the healthcare component. It struck me as very disingenuous that you'd have this organization that obviously has flaws, and instead of trying to work on those flaws before they were going to exploit other Black trans people to, advertise their services, they were just going to go ahead, advertise services, not really address any of the issues, and then hope everything was okay. Um, Compounded with the fact that at the time, my primary doctor that I had through them was changed without my knowledge, and I had to find out about it in a completely unrelated work meeting, scheduling, uh, whatever the events were of the upcoming week, and finding out very nonchalantly from uh, one of my white superiors on the side that this doctor that was initially pushed to us to be like, oh, he's very welcoming and open. He's a white gay guy, and you won't have to worry about any of the issues you have to worry about dealing with a non-gay person or like a straight person. And then to find that they had been switched, and now they're giving out. They were, I guess, a doctor specifically dealing with anal health and giving the uh, procedures for people to get checked for their anus in case there are any like either cancers or health risks related to that. I thought was like very it was ironic, but there was a situational irony, but not in a good way, of course. Um, on top of knowing that there were other people who were my age, who were older, who were younger, still dealing with these issues. And then after the fact, kind of coming to me with through like social media at the time, detailing their experiences. That had led me to make like a secondary, I guess, document, if you will, that wasn't like an article of me detailing the experiences that I experienced, but I had compiled all of the people who had sent me messages and were talking about how this organization had impacted them without, naming names, so to speak, keeping it anonymous. I essentially had crafted a document called The Community Speaks, and it was detailing a lot of the people, a lot of Black trans people who were also having these issues with this organization. And I was let to do that because, from the time of me being at this organization and then leaving, all of these other issues that were never being addressed, all of these people's experiences that they had and that they did not really feel comfortable sharing, you know, themselves to compromise their security and such. I felt that it was necessary to, just make an anonymous document and being like, that's not just me and my family experiencing issues here. There is a community of people experiencing issues here. And knowing that that probably wouldn't be taken seriously, it didn't deter me because, not to say that I was in the right, but I knew that there were issues here that needed to be addressed. And waiting for an entire nonprofit evergreen corporation structure to accept their limitations and commit to doing better would never happen. So that really spurned not only the process of creating the Dorian Corey project, that was the kind of like the final, if you will, kind of the final output from what had been started initially, which is called Transgressions, which is kind of like its own, it was modeled after being its own specific, trans group that was not affiliated with any kind of nonprofit, any kind of, nonprofit industrial complex effect, no surveillancing white and or cis people to essentially use us for quota to, be able to check off on these government forms that, oh yes, we've had this many people, and this many people are white, this many people are Black, this many people are Latino, this many people are other of they're this age, they're that age. Now give us some grant money. I wanted something that was completely devoid of all of that. And unfortunately, like a lot of areas here in the US, legitimacy is very specifically only given to white organizations. Um, it has to have the look and the feel of a legit company to be legit. And so, in my opinion, out of that, and out of Transgressions, the need of having a group that talks about these issues and talks about the history was essential, just because, again, we're going to be erased. We're going to be whitewashed. We're going to be removed from our own histories, our own legacies. And especially in this digital age, the social media age, we need to combat that. So I think that's where I want to end there for now. Maybe we can make another live stream detailing some of our other experiences. But thank you.
You're welcome. As always.
And so this is the Dorian Corey Project signing out.